Hello everyone and welcome to my Y&R Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The oppressive silence of the penthouse was broken only by the rhythmic clinking of ice in a crystal tumbler. Adam Newman stared into the amber depths of his bourbon, but he wasn't really seeing it. His mind was 1,000 miles away, or more precisely, just a few miles across Genoa City, in the sterile secretive labs of a discreet private testing facility. For weeks, a gnawing, inexplicable feeling had been festering in his gut, a ghost of a suspicion so nebulous he hadn't even dared to give it voice. It had started with a throwaway comment from a nurse during a routine checkup, a confused look at his chart, a mention of a rare blood factor that didn't align with what he thought he knew about his own biology. He'd chalked it up to a clerical error, a common enough occurrence in the labyrinthine world of healthcare. But the seed was planted, and in the fertile paranoid soil of Adam Newman's psyche, it began to grow, fed by a lifetime of feeling like an outsider in his own family, the perpetual black sheep, the son who could never quite measure up to the golden memory of his half-brother, the saintly Connor. He'd finally acted on the impulse, a wild, almost self-destructive gamble, and submitted his DNA for a comprehensive genealogical and medical workup. The results were due any moment, and the waiting was a special kind of torture. Across town, in the more subdued, almost academic quiet of his own apartment, Kane was wrestling with a similar, though far more immediate, disquiet. His journey hadn't begun with a vague feeling, but with a concrete, physical anomaly. A minor scheduled surgery, a preoperative blood panel that had come back with flags so unusual the surgeon had insisted on a deeper genetic screening before proceeding. Kane, ever the pragmatist, had agreed, thinking little of it. He was a man of logic, of facts, and a strange blood marker was just a puzzle to be solved. But when the report landed in his inbox, the language was dense, clinical, and pointed toward a chromosomal inconsistency that was, according to the attached note from a baffled genetic counselor, statistically improbable given his known family history. He'd spent the evening deep in medical journals and online forums, the cold, hard light of his computer screen illuminating the growing confusion on his face. The pieces weren't fitting. His established identity, the bedrock of who he was, felt suddenly less solid, as if the ground beneath him had developed a hairline crack that was threatening to widen into a chasm. The notification arrived on both their phones within minutes of each other. For Adam, it was a push alert from the testing service. "Your results are ready." His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat of dread and anticipation. He set the tumbler down, the ice now mostly melted, and with a finger that trembled slightly he tapped the screen, navigating through the secure login. For Kane, it was an email from the geneticist, the subject line stark and simple: follow-up report and analysis. He opened it, his eyes scanning past the introductory pleasantries, searching for the raw data, the truth buried in the combinations of adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. What followed was a silent, solitary earthquake. Adam's eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat as he scrolled through the percentages, the haplogroup assignments, the list of genetic relatives. There, at the top of the list of high-probability close family matches, was a name that made no sense. It was impossible. A glitch, a catastrophic error in their database. He refreshed the page, his knuckles white. The result didn't change. Simultaneously, Kane was staring at his own screen, his brow furrowed in utter bewilderment. The report clearly indicated a specific paternal lineage marker, one that was publicly documented in certain high-profile families, due to rare genetic studies done decades prior. It was a marker he knew, from his own research into Genoa City's history, was associated with one family in particular, the Newmans. His mind raced, rejecting the implication. It was a coincidence, a fluke of population genetics. But then he cross-referenced the coded identifier of his closest genetic match, provided by the service with a public database of voluntary donors. When the alias resolved, his blood ran cold. The match was Adam Newman. Not a brother, as the shared paternal marker would suggest for Victor, but something else, something that made the pieces click into a horrifying, impossible new picture. If he and Adam shared this specific genetic signature from the Newman line, but weren't brothers, the logic was inescapable, yet it defied all known reality. It meant their understanding of their very origins, of Victor Newman's history, was a lie. A frantic, Almost manic energy took hold of Adam. He couldn't sit with this alone. He needed a sounding board, a conspirator, someone who was connected to this madness. His first instinct was to call Victor, to demand answers, to rage at the man who had orchestrated so much of his life's pain. But a colder, more calculating instinct held him back. Victor would only obfuscate, would twist the truth into another one of his manipulative games. He needed proof, he needed an ally. With his heart in his throat, he scrolled through his contacts and placed a call he never would have imagined making. Kane's phone buzzed on the desk next to his laptop, shattering the heavy silence. He saw Adam's name on the caller ID and a fresh wave of shock rolled through him. This was no coincidence. He answered, his voice tight. Adam. The single word was laden with a shared, unspoken understanding. We need to talk. Adam's voice was low, urgent, stripped of its usual arrogance. Now. It's about the DNA. Kane didn't hesitate. I know. I just saw it. Where are you? They met in a neutral, anonymous location. A quiet corner of a closed coffee shop whose owner owed Adam a favor. The air between them was thick with a surreal tension. These were two men bound by rivalry, by history, by their complicated relationships with the same woman, and now it seemed by something far more fundamental. Without preamble, they placed their phones on the table, the screens displaying the damning evidence. They compared the data, their voices hushed and frantic, pointing at shared markers, at the undeniable genetic link that painted a family tree neither of them had ever envisioned. This can't be right, Kane muttered, running a hand through his hair. It means Victor, my father. He couldn't finish the sentence. It means the old man has been sitting on the biggest secret of them all, Adam finished, his eyes blazing with a volatile mix of fury and a strange, grim triumph. All my life he made me feel like I was the mistake, the flawed copy, the one who didn't belong. But this proves the flaw was in his story, not in me. They pieced it together, a theory forming from the fragments of half-remembered stories, old rumors, and the cold, hard science laid out before them. It was a secret so profound it threatened to shatter the very foundation of the Newman dynasty. While Adam and Kane were deep in their shocking confabulation, Victor Newman was in his office at Newman Enterprises, attempting to project an image of unshakable control. He was reviewing merger documents, but the words blurred on the page. A deep, primal sense of unease had been plaguing him all day, a tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with his heart condition, and everything to do with the two most volatile wild cards in his life. He'd heard whispers through his vast network of informants that Adam had been making unusually specific inquiries at a private genetic lab. At the time, Victor had dismissed it as one of Adam's typical paranoid power plays, perhaps related to his son Connor. But then a separate, more alarming report had crossed his desk. Kane had undergone unexpected genetic screening prior to his surgery. Two separate threads, innocuous on their own, but viewed together through the lens of Victor's deepest, most heavily guarded secret, they formed a cable of pure dread. He tried to reassure himself. The tests were private, the data secure. The chances of them stumbling upon the truth, and then connecting their disparate findings, were astronomically low. Weren't they? His phone rang, the private line known only to a handful of people. It was the head of his security detail. The man's voice was carefully neutral, but Victor could hear the tension beneath the surface. Sir, we have a situation. Mr. Adam Newman and Dr. Kane are currently meeting at a closed establishment on the east side. The location was secured by Mr. Newman personally. Our surveillance was unable to get close, but their demeanor upon arrival appeared agitated. A cold fist closed around Victor's heart. Agitated. Meeting in secret. The two men who, according to the hidden truth he had buried for decades, had more in common than anyone could possibly imagine. It was happening. The walls he had spent a lifetime building were beginning to crack. He ended the call abruptly, his hand shaking as he placed the phone back on its cradle. The panic was no longer a subtle undercurrent. It was a tidal wave crashing over him, stealing his breath. He stood up, pacing behind his massive desk, his mind racing through contingencies, through damage control, through threats and bribes and any possible way to contain this catastrophe. He saw the entire glittering empire he had built crumbling before his eyes. This wasn't just a scandal. It was an existential threat. The revelation would not only destroy his family but eviscerate his legacy. The press, his rivals, his own children, the fallout would be nuclear. Nikki would look at him with betrayal in her eyes. Victoria's hard-won respect would evaporate. Nick's simmering resentment would boil over. And Adam, with this new ammunition, would become an unstoppable force of vengeance. And Cain, the reasonable moral center, would be shattered, his entire identity rewritten in an instant. Victor's carefully constructed world, a world where he was the patriarch, the master, the one who pulled all the strings, was on the verge of collapsing into chaotic, humiliating ruin. He had to stop it. He had to get to them, to control the narrative, to spin this truth into another one of his powerful lies. But for the first time in a very long time, Victor Newman felt a terrifying sensation. He was too late. The genie was out of the bottle, and it was a genie forged in the very double helix of his own deceit. Back in the coffee shop, Adam and Cain had moved from shock to a grim, determined planning stage. The initial fury had subsided, replaced by a cold, focused resolve. They were, for the moment, reluctant allies bound by a shared enemy and a shared truth. "He knows," Adam said, his voice low and certain. "He can feel it. The old man has spies everywhere. It's only a matter of time before he comes crashing in here, trying to bully us into silence." Cain, though reeling, nodded in agreement. His scientific mind was already working on the problem. "We need more than this printout. This is compelling, but it's just data. We need corroboration. We need a source, a witness, something he can't explain away as a lab error." A dangerous, calculating glint appeared in Adam's eye. "I know where he keeps his secrets. The safe in the ranch, the one behind the portrait of my mother. There are journals, documents. He's a narcissist, he would have kept a record. He couldn't just let a secret this big exist only in his memory." The plan was audacious, reckless, and born of sheer desperation. They would confront Victor, but not empty-handed. They would go to the ranch, they would find the proof, and then they would force the great Victor Newman to look them in the eye and confess to the lie that had defined their entire lives. As they stood to leave, a unified front forged in genetic fire, Victor was already in the back of his town car, his driver speeding toward the same destination. He stared out the window at the passing city, but he didn't see the gleaming towers he had built. He saw the past, a tangled web of choices and deceptions made in another lifetime, coming back to claim him. He thought of the woman at the heart of it all, a ghost who had haunted him for years, and the impossible decision he had been forced to make. A decision that had created this ticking time bomb. He tried to compose his face into its usual mask of impenetrable authority, but the panic was a live wire under his skin. He was heading home to the ranch that was his fortress, but for the first time it felt like he was riding into an ambush. The two sons, though neither knew the full truth of that word, were coming, and they were coming for blood. The battle for the soul of the Newman family was about to begin, and it would not be fought in the boardroom, but in the heart of his home, over the most intimate, devastating secret he had ever kept. Adam and Cain's uneasy alliance had always been one of necessity rather than trust, but when the new DNA test results arrived, everything they thought they knew about Genoa City's tangled web of family connections began to collapse. Adam had been the first to suspect something was off. Ever since Victor's reactions to recent events seemed more defensive than strategic. He had watched his father manipulate people his entire life, but lately there was something different. A tension that didn't quite fit the confident, commanding Victor Newman everyone knew. When Cain Ashby stumbled into the same mystery from an entirely different angle, it was like two puzzle pieces snapping into place. Cain's discovery came from an old file found in Chancellor Industries' archives. Records Victor had ordered sealed years ago. It mentioned a genetic test, a discrepancy in DNA markers, and the name A. Newman scribbled beside it in red ink. Adam wasn't sure whether to believe Cain at first. Their shared history was complicated, filled with rivalry, mistrust, and backroom deals that often ended in betrayal. But as Cain laid out the details, Adam's guarded skepticism began to fade. The document had been authenticated, and the dates lined up with a period when Victor had gone unusually quiet about his family affairs. The two men sat in Cain's office, the file spread open between them, their eyes scanning line after line of genetic data, neither of them fully understood but both instinctively knew was explosive. Adam's hand trembled slightly as he pointed to a specific line. The paternal DNA sequence didn't match Victor Newman's. It wasn't a false positive or a lab error. This was real. The implications hit him like a blow to the chest. If the file was correct, then one of Victor's supposed children might not be his at all, or worse, someone entirely unexpected shared Newman DNA. For Cain, the revelation carried its own kind of weight. His connection to the Chancellor legacy had always been questioned, and after years of fighting for his place, he knew how easily one hidden secret could unravel a life. But this wasn't just any family scandal. It was a Newman secret, and that meant danger. Cain looked at Adam with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity, trying to gauge how much the younger Newman already suspected. Adam's expression was unreadable, his mind racing through every recent interaction with Victor, every cryptic look, every sudden decision. "He knows," Adam finally muttered, almost to himself. "He's been covering this for years." Cain nodded slowly, realizing that Victor's panic wasn't about business, power, or money. It was about blood. The one thing Victor Newman had built his empire on was the sanctity of his family name. If that foundation cracked, everything else would crumble. Adam decided they needed confirmation before confronting Victor. Cain agreed, though he worried about the risks. They reached out to a trusted contact at Memorial Hospital's genetics department, someone who owed Cain a favor, and arranged for a quiet retest using samples from the Newman family's previous medical records. The results came back within days, but those few days stretched like an eternity. Adam couldn't focus. Every conversation with Victor became an exercise in restraint, each glance from his father a test of composure. He began noticing things he'd overlooked before. Victor's avoidance of certain topics, his abrupt changes of subject when questions about family arose, the unease in his eyes whenever the topic of lineage came up. When the envelope finally arrived, Adam and Cain met again, this time in a secluded corner of society after hours. The restaurant was dark, save for a dim light above their table. Cain opened the envelope carefully, his jaw tightening as his eyes scanned the page. "It's true," he said softly, handing it to Adam. Adam stared at the paper, his pulse quickening. One of the Newman DNA profiles didn't match Victor's genetic code. Not Adam's. His had already been confirmed in the past. It was someone else. And the name made Adam's stomach drop, Nick. For years Victor had treated Nick as his golden son, the one who could do no wrong, the loyal heir who carried the Newman name with pride. But according to this report, Nick wasn't Victor's biological son. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. Adam's emotions warred within him, shock, disbelief, a dark flicker of satisfaction, and then guilt. He knew what this could do to his family, to his father's empire, and yet part of him felt vindicated. Victor had always favored Nick, always held Adam at arm's length, and now the irony was almost poetic. Cain watched him carefully, sensing the storm brewing behind Adam's calm exterior. "We can't just go to him with this," Cain warned. "He'll deny it, maybe destroy the evidence. We need to think this through." Adam nodded, though his mind was already racing ahead. He wasn't sure what his next move would be. But he knew one thing for certain: Victor Newman was about to face the one thing he couldn't control: the truth. Meanwhile, back at the Newman ranch, Victor felt the walls closing in. He had always been several steps ahead of his enemies, but lately things felt different. His instincts told him Adam was digging again, and the thought filled him with dread. He had gone to great lengths to bury that particular secret decades ago. Only a handful of people had known the truth, and most of them were either gone or sworn to silence. The paternity issue had been a mistake from the start, a secret born of desperation and pride. Victor had made choices back then to protect his family's image, not realizing how deeply those choices would haunt him years later. Now, as he sat in his study, swirling a glass of brandy and staring at the fire, the past loomed over him like a shadow he couldn't escape. Nikki had noticed his unease. She'd asked him several times what was bothering him, but Victor brushed her off with the same cold assurance he used on his business rivals. But when she wasn't looking, he'd call private investigators, cross-check old records, and monitor any signs that his secret might be leaking. When a quiet inquiry revealed that Cain Ashby had requested restricted access to Newman medical archives, Victor's composure finally cracked. He slammed his glass onto the table, brandy splashing across his hand, his expression darkening with fury and fear. "Damn it, Adam. he muttered, knowing his son must be behind it. Victor's panic wasn't about exposure alone. It was about what the revelation would mean for the Newman legacy. If Nick wasn't truly his son, what would happen to the empire he'd built in his name? Cain and Adam decided to test Victor's reaction before making their move. Adam paid his father a visit under the pretense of a casual conversation about business. As he spoke, he slipped in subtle remarks about family loyalty, bloodlines, and legacies. Victor's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained calm, controlled, too calm. It was confirmation enough. "You're fishing for something," Victor said finally, setting his glass down with deliberate precision. "I know that look in your eyes, son. You think you're clever, but you don't know the whole story." Adam leaned forward slightly, his tone sharp but steady. "Maybe I don't," he said, "but I know enough to make you nervous." For a brief moment, the air between them crackled with unspoken tension, both men understanding that the balance of power was shifting. After that conversation, Victor's behavior became more erratic.